Welcome back, Whisky fans. Today we're looking at the Lakes Whisky Makers Reserve No. 5. So the Lakes is another English distillery, another reasonably new one. It was founded in 2014 in a place called Cockermouth, Cumbria, because that is a real place. So they've been around for a little while, 8 years now or thereabouts. So they're kind of one of the veterans of our lineup of new releases. And something that makes this one very special is that it's bottled at a very healthy ABV of 52%. So without a doubt one of the strongest in our lineup of new distilleries. So that I think can be a little bit of a double-edged sword. It's going to give an advantage to the Lakes with this one, but there's also a little bit of pressure there. Because with that advantage of that higher ABV, it really should be a clear step up from the others. Also, I always think it's a little bit of a risky move coming out with new, youngish whiskey and going for a high ABV or having cask strength releases, because if there is any harsh immaturity to your whiskey, then cask strength is definitely going to point that out. As for the details on the label and the box for this one, it is all there, but it's not that obvious immediately. I'm just going to show you the bottle. I think it's a wonderful bottle, it's a good mix of traditional and modern, I think. Kind of round on the top, but clover shaped on the bottom, which is kind of the Lakes Distillery logo. Wonderful cork stopper. Sort of, I'm not sure actually, that might be actual metal on the top, or metallized plastic, not sure. But good, proper, solid bit of cork on the cork stopper there, and a very attractive little detail on the top. And to start with, I thought that even though this is bottled at 52%, it didn't actually mention natural colour or non-chill filtration. But I am wrong, sort of. I don't think it's on the label, but if you look at the box, at least if your whiskey comes in a box, it actually says it in reasonably small font there, non-chill filtered and natural colour. So, high ABV. Haven't got an age statement, but we know that from a distillery that was only established in 2011, you know it's going to be at least reasonably young. Natural colour, non-chill filtered, and they give us some really good details about the whiskey that goes into this and the casks that they use as well. So kind of 9, 10 out of 10 for presentation and transparency on this one, I think. If you are interested in buying any whiskey from the Lakes Distillery, or if you've got any, what I would recommend is having a look at their website, because they've got a really, really good one. There is a lot of information there. It's clearly geared up for people like you and me, people who obsess over their whiskey a little bit and like to know all of the details. So, details for this one. This is Whisky Makers Reserve No. 5, matured in the finest, meticulously sourced Oloroso, PX and red wine casks. So a little bit of a mixture there. We also know that the fermentation time on this one is very long. It's actually a 96-hour fermentation. They also tell us that the whiskey that the new make at the Lakes Distillery is made with a very narrow cut. And even more than that, it's not just that they're taking a narrow cut from their spirit, so sort of going for a less efficient means of production to get that super refined and fruity quality cut of the spirit without any feints, with as little off notes as possible. But they even claim to mash slowly for extra flavour. Going back to the casks used for this one, I mentioned that it's matured in a combination of Oloroso, Pedro Jimenez and red wine casks. And we're also told that they're made of Spanish and American oak. So I'm really pleased that this is a new distillery that's not messing around with things like STR casks and virgin oak. This is a very different approach to making young whiskey, and in my opinion, a slightly high risk and probably very expensive approach to making whiskey as well. When I first started looking into Lakes, I actually did what I normally do with new distilleries, and I looked for more of a standard maturation, so probably something from a bourbon cask without things like STR or PX or any of those trick casks that a lot of distilleries are using to cover up flavours. And you basically can't find any, because the Lakes Distillery, they're quite unique these days, especially when it comes to new distilleries, that they're using sherry casks for over 80% of the whiskey that they produce. So they're really going for that grape-led, cask-led, sweet and fruity, indulgent style. Something else that I found when I was doing my research on the lakes that I thought was really interesting, so they actually make 2 different types of New Wake spirits with different yeasts each week and then blend them together for every whisky that they make. Obviously, it's not a new thing to hear about distilleries experimenting with different yeast strains, but I don't think that I've ever heard of any distillery routinely using 2 different yeast strains to make 2 different new makes and routinely blending them together like that. Just goes to show that Lakes Distillery, they're not only improvising and innovating, but they're really taking every care and going to every effort they can to make the best whisky that they can. So let's get some in the glass and see what it's like. I am going to be nosing and tasting this at full 52%. I think that 52% is a really good strength for any well-made whisky. I have tried it with water, and spoiler, I think it swims really well. I don't think that it opens up that much. It doesn't really develop and give you many new flavours, but I think that even better than that possibly, the flavour profile basically stays the same. It obviously just gets a little bit more diluted and a little bit weaker as you add water. So if you're the kind of person that struggles a little bit with whiskies over the 50% mark, this one is going to be perfect for you because you can kind of tailor the ABV to whatever you want without changing the profile too much. So Lakes Whisky Makers Reserve number 5 on the nose. So as you would probably expect with any strong high ABV well-made whisky using PX, Oloroso and red wine, the nose on this one is extremely rich, really fruity, jammy, indulgent, sugary, dense fruity notes. It's actually a little bit liqueur-like, getting strong notes of strawberry jam, which is something that I often associate with a red wine cask. Very chocolatey sultanas, orangey notes coming through from that sherry. There's definitely some wood spice coming through from the casks, but not too much. Getting a very slight background faint medicinal clove note on the nose, and I think that may just be coming through from the wood spice and all the different casks, possibly some European oak. Definitely not a peated whisky, not picking up any peat on this. I believe it is an unpeated whisky. There's also an interesting savoury, cheesy note on this one, and some dry cocoa powder. So very interesting and well made nose for this one. Let's see how it tastes. So on the palate of this one, as I said, perfectly drinkable at the full 52% ABV, getting some strong notes of polished oak and leather, so they're things that you traditionally associate with traditional sherry matured whisky. Getting some tobacco, some nutty notes, so things like pecans, almonds, bit of a marzipan note. Getting some really nice ripe fig notes, there's some dates in there, and really just all of the red fruits. So things like strawberry, raspberry, lots of grapiness on the nose, perhaps a little bit more orange, and just a nice bitterness from the oak. One of the things that I really like about this whisky though is, apart from that very enjoyable flavour profile, it's just the incredible density of all the flavours on the nose and the palate. It's going to have another sip and look at the finish. That colour. I'm really pleased that they actually told us that this is natural colour. For once you've got a whisky which is that dark, which we know for a fact has not been artificially coloured in any way. Quite often these days when we see a whisky which is advertised as natural colour, it's quite often very pale, especially if it's a younger whisky or if it's been matured in bourbon casks. Much, much, much lighter than this. But because they've used all of those red wine and sherry and grape derived casks for this one, it's really gone to town on putting the colour into this one. So as for the finish on this, I'm going to say medium long, which is not too bad at all for such a young whisky. And on the finish, I'm really getting lots of perfumed woody notes, polished wood, and a little bit of Turkish delight. So all in all, I think that this one's really going to come down to whether you like that heavily grape-led, really red fruit, jammy, sweet and fruity flavour profile or not. This is going to be a whisky that anyone that is a fan of that profile will really like. If that's not your thing, then possibly stay away from this one, and possibly other Lakes releases as well, because it does seem like this sort of grape cask influenced whisky is where they want to be and what they're aiming towards. For me though, I think that this style works really, really well. It's a little bit of an unpopular style with new distilleries. When we look at the rest of the releases that I've looked at in this series, there isn't really anything else that leans heavy on the sherry. So they've really done something to make themselves stand out amongst the crowd when it comes to the other new distilleries coming out at the moment. And that's obviously a bold move, and as I said before, it's an expensive approach to take. But I think that it works really, really well. With this one, I'm going to go with a solid B grade, and because the density of the flavours in this, I'm even tempted to go up, almost tempted to go up to a B+, but I think as it is, it's going to be a high B. Other whiskies that I've had recently that are similar to this, as I said, I don't think there's many new distilleries that are going for this extremely heavily sherried style, at least not regularly, but it does really remind me of that English Whisky Company Sherry Butts release. I think that one from the English Whisky Company, and it's a little bit unfair to compare them, but I think that the Norfolk release is a bit more mature and a bit more complex, but really considering that these guys have not been around for anywhere near as long as the English Whisky Company, they're doing a fantastic job and they're really not very far behind at all. And I do think that it's really interesting that they've exclusively gone for this heavily sherried style. I think that it's really good that they've chiseled out their niche early on, and it's something that they're pursuing and trying to master. And I think if they continue with it and they continue to improve and keep this level of quality, I think that the Lakes could very well be kind of in like 10 to 15 years time, they could really be the English Macallan, although hopefully not as overpriced as Macallan. We'll just mention one more time that they have got an absolutely amazing website. There's so many details on there, and there's a lot to learn about making whiskey in general. Even if you're not interested in their whiskey, it's worth going on there just to learn all the details and technical stuff that they're giving us. And if you are tempted to buy one of their whiskies, then their online shop on their website is pretty good as well. They charge some quite fair prices on their website, pretty comparable to what you can get with the specialist retailers. So it's always nice to go direct, and it's even nicer when we go direct that we don't get ripped off for doing so. So I hope you've enjoyed watching this review, and let me know what you think of the Lakes if you have tried it, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.